Hi, welcome to part 2 of Handwriting Without Tears. We're going to focus on the Get Set for School program. If you haven't seen part 1, please check it out. We're going to review some of the concepts that we covered in part 1, but we're going to expand on the visual perceptual piece. We'll see as we walk through the slides. I'm going to try to hopefully let this make sense to you. Okay, if you don't have a piece of paper or pencil, please grab it now. Quick, 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 quick. You can pause it too. And I want you to draw me a square. Right? Easy peasy. Got that? All right, you ready for the next thing? Draw me a thingamajig. Now, I've done this with live audiences and they're laughing at me and they shout out, I don't know what a thingamajig looks like. And that's my point. So if you're asking a kid to write a letter, so like say, write me an A, and they don't know what it looks like, you're pretty much telling them to draw a thingamajig. Because what we need in order to write and to, especially from memory, is our visual perceptual skills. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And we want to think about now, of course, which one was harder, the thingamajig, because we have no idea what it looks like, right? Or you can reflect on anything else. And before we move on again, get your paper out and close your eyes and write your name. Open them up. This is when I get to hear people like, oh my goodness, I can write with my eyes closed. It's pretty cool, right? And how are we able to do that? Well, we're able to do that. A lot of that is motor memory because we've been doing that forever and ever, and we really don't need our eyes to write. And when you can write without looking with your eyes, that's a good chance that there's automaticity there. It's kind of a built-in motor driving all by itself, and we don't have to think about what our hand is doing. It's pretty cool. And that's our eventual goal that we want for our kids, right? We want to be able to have smooth automatic writing. They can express their thoughts and they don't have to stop and think. And hopefully they're holding their writing tool correctly and their hand's not getting tired and they're quick and efficient and they're able to plan and write on a line and have good spacing. That's our big, long end goal. But there's many, many steps before that. And I want to kind of circle back too about I want our kids to feel good about themselves. I got on my soapbox a lot on part 1, if you want to check that out again. And I think a lot of that is just meeting the child where they're at to grade the activities so they're successful and independent, and they're learning and interacting in a functional way. So that's kind of like my guiding principles as I'm working with younger children. And I pull out the turtle. Turtle is slow and steady wins the race. I think pushing development and making go faster, is not going to do anyone any good in the long term. We want to meet the child where they're at, expand their skills, make sure their confidence is there, and they will grow and thrive. Okay. And, one of the things I talk about, I talk a lot about broken crayons. You want to watch part 1 again. And a lot of times, like that's my last alternative. Our kids aren't having all the exposure they used to years ago to play skills and interacting and coloring and beads and all that. A lot of our kids are using technology as their play tool. And, an iPad doesn't really develop your fine motor skills. It's not going to work on all those underlying things. Of course, we know like Back to Sleep campaign, our kids, tummy time is just a special time rather than all the time. Infants should be on their bellies a lot, but they're not doing that anymore. And that's just changing their development and their overall hand development later on in life. So I always go back to the broken crayon. It's like a forced choice, and we're really being able to refine that skill side in order to write functionally later on. Okay. So we talked earlier about informal instruction. So informal instruction is working a lot on that visual perceptual piece because we're not really required to do that heavy fine motor yet. And this is where we start our children, usually around 3 to 3.5, 4 even. That's okay, is to start them there. They're at that play-based activity. It's multi-sensory. They're being able to perceive. You can see these kids right here. that are touching them. They have them on the floor. And I can go over like a little story about, you think about when you give a child something new, what do? They want to touch it. You bring them to a new place. They touch everything. Please stop touching that. Parents are chasing their kids. Stop touching that. Stop touching that. Well, we're perceiving what it looks like, that it feels like with our fingers. We have tons of like nerve receptors at our fingertips. And the other big place that we have nerve receptors is around our mouths. So a lot of times younger kids, you give them something new, the first thing they do is they put it in their mouth. And what they're doing is they're using their perception of what it looks like, what it feels like, because their eyes, are still developing. They don't have that maturation that an older child or an adult has, that we can look at an item and perceive it and understand it. Kids are more likely to understand something when they interact with it. So with that in mind, that's when all these multisensory tools with the Handwriting Without Tears program fit beautifully with where the child's at. And while you're working with the child and interacting with these multisensory tools, you're building on their visual perceptual skills and an understanding of, like, for example, Matman, big line versus the big curve, and the little curve versus the little line. There's a lot of components. It's a nice, simple system, but we want to make sure our kids can perceive each of them and to organize them, to really know them and interact with them before we put the demands of letters and letter knowledge on the table. We want to work on, being able to explore and learn and engage. We can also work on that singing and multisensory activities that are involved. And then we can build on to Matman and using the pieces for Matman. And then eventually, we can start coloring and drawing. Right now I have my classrooms, we're only working on the head. Can they form the head with the wooden pieces? Okay, can they do it from memory? Great. Now I have my visual perceptual skills. They know what a big curve and a little curve are. We've worked on that. Now let's see if we can work on their visual memory. So you could just provide the circle. What pieces are missing? Have them work on access that visual memory. If it's too hard, just provide them with the circle in front of them and have the wooden pieces right to the side. Oh, wait a minute. I need 3 little curves. Where do my little curves go? Well, I need them for my ears and my mouth. Oh, let's add them. Now they're getting that practice, those little strokes in there, some practice and interaction in nice little small doses that are hopefully successful. And then their written output, I feel good about my product. I'm going to bring it home. And tomorrow we're going to make it just a little bit harder, a little bit more challenging, and see, how our skills progress. So I mentioned this a little bit with the part 1, but let's circle back and think about visual perception, because that's kind of what the soapbox I'm standing on today. So all of these skills and working with the wooden pieces and interacting with them and touching them and forming with them, that's all going to build a nice foundation. And if you looked at any of I've done MIDI lessons that are about 10 minutes each for each of the uppercase letters. And if you've watched any of them, I progress with, in general, I start with this mat. This is the easiest way to interact with the letter. If you have a child that's just starting, you're introducing the program to them, you don't know where to begin, start right here. This for me would be this here was the introduction and play. And then once we get through this, even Matman could be even down here. Then we can start with the letters if we want to start interacting with the letters. I guess let me circle back. When you're interacting with the letters, start here, right? This is our mat. It's like a lot of errorless training. All we're doing is matching the line to the piece. It's just match. And they don't have to perceive anything. It's already, the perception is there. It's provided, and we're just going to mask it right on top. Then we can start pulling the mat. If you watch the video again, the next step I do is I have the blue mat there, and it's pretty much like a blank slate, and I only have the pieces there. Well, how do I fit the pieces? Can I perceive? Can I remember what the mat looked like? And then I have to go on to that next stage of forming a letter with the wooden pieces. Again, low fine motor demand. What we're really working on is that visual perception. We're also working on sequential memory and our visual memory. We're working on all those nice skills that are going to really pay off dividends later on. And again, other ways we can interact. I've also worked on, if you watch the videos again, multi-sensory. I use a lot with Rolodo, and you can use it a lot with, I embedded fine motor skills in there, because what we want to do as we're building up those visual perceptual skills and visual memory of each of the letters and letter knowledge, we can also work on our fine motor skills, because we're going to need that later on when we write. Again, and we move along, we can go to the Stampin' C, we can grade it. It's a little bit more difficult, which is going to be able to refine our skills. And the Stampin' C is introduction of using a writing tool and with writings. But at the same time, we don't even have to pick that up. If it gets too hard and the child's not being able to make that big line and big curve, or they're getting frustrated, they put it aside and say, all right, just do stamping. And then really provide the stamp for them, and they can even do the matching with the stamp, and you can grade it. In addition, just in case you haven't known, you don't know, is you can use the Rolodo mats on top of the Stampin' C if you want to also scaffold and grade there. And finally, we can go on to the wet, dry, try with the chalkboards, which again is tracing. So with the tracing component, the visual perceptual is being provided, and we're working on that visual output, that motor output, in order to get that automaticity and that practice and interaction. And you can hang out on these areas for about a year. So say if you start with, say if an average preschooler is a 3.5, and they can spend the whole preschool year just doing this stuff, that's okay. And even they can get quite a ways through their pre-K year, interacting and learning. And then we can start working on the workbooks later on in small doses that are successful. And we want to make sure that our kids are interacting. If it's too hard, just keep backing up until you get independence. And then just like on a side note, I've over the years, and I'm guilty of it, I've done it myself when I'm absolutely desperate, we do hand over hand. So it's the adult putting their hand over a kid and guiding their hand to write. And as much as I reflect and think about and talk with you today, what do you think a kid's really getting out of that? I know some people have said, oh, they're getting that motor memory and their motor. I kind of disagree with that. I'm not sure they're getting that much. I think the bigger message they could possibly be getting is, I need an adult in order to do this. And if that's the overarching thought, I don't think any motor memory you might be building is probably worth that. So if you find yourself guiding a child's hand to write, I think, that's too difficult. That's, occupational therapists or physical therapists talk about max assistance. So that's about 75% or more help. So if you're doing hand over hand, you're doing maximal assistance. And if you're doing maximal assistance day after day, it's probably because the task is too hard. So what you have to do is change the task in order to increase the child's independence. So we want to back up. If they're not writing their name right here, so let's see if they can write it with tracing it. Can they trace it? Can they interact? Can they trace 2 of their letters in their name? Maybe they don't have the stamina. Maybe it's so difficult to do all these letters. Have them just make the S. All right, you made an S today. All right, watch me. That's the other thing I love to do. Some of the things, I took neuroanatomy, and the biggest takeaway I've ever learned, one of my professors mentioned, on an fMRI study, they've done studies with people of doing a task. So they do the brain waves, they can see the brain lighting it up, and maybe they're under and they're making an A, and they can see their head, parts of their brain that are lighting up and their brain fires. Then they watch a video of someone making, for example, an A, and it's pretty much the same parts of the brain regions light up. So even watching someone do something is almost as good as doing it yourself. So you can even do my turn, your turn. You can say, so if we're working with Sophia now, Sophia, can you make your A or your S? Perfect. You did a great job. Oh, you're okay. Now it's my turn. I'm going to make the O. So I'm going to make the O. Oh, it's your turn. Can you make the P? And at least they're watching. And then the next day, maybe you reverse it. Maybe I make the S for Sophia, and then she makes the O. And then you're getting that scaffolding and that practice. And they're being able to see and they're getting exposure to the letter. So it's another way to grade it. Just an idea to throw out there. So again, we have the big line, big curve, little curve, and those are the pieces that we're trying to perceive. We want to work on our perception of big versus little and curve versus straight. And a lot of our 3-year-olds need some practice and repetition and exposure to this. Ways that we can do it is just have them play and interact and touch them. We can also work on shapes. We can work on patterns. You can check again on my station. I've started making videos with that. And it's not necessarily you have to do it my exact way, but it may give you ideas and strategies that you can cover with your kids. The wooden pieces, again, we could stay here for a while. We can work on position and space. Bilateral hand skills. If you think of the song Tap Big Lines, right here, bilateral hand skills are really important. So that's being able to use both your hands at the same time for a common purpose. So if we think about handwriting, we're going to be holding our writing tool with our dominant hand, and hopefully our non-dominant hand is holding down or anchoring the paper. When students do not have that good bilateral integration and they're not anchoring their papers twist and move around later on in life. They have a hard time with writing on a line, and their spacing and their organization becomes really difficult. So you want to work on that bilateral skills. And in the picture up here, tactile, again, kids are explore and touch with their fingertips and they can feel it. I can feel that a big line is bigger than a little line. Maybe my eyes can't quite feel that or see the difference now, but I know when I touch them, they're different. Position and space is also really important. And we're also working on some of those core foundational vocabulary words such as top, middle, and bottom. We can also work on left to right, which is also difficult, but you're getting exposure to it. You're knowing at least there's 2 different sides. Do I know where they are? Maybe not, but I know there's 2 different sides of my body. So using the pieces for pre-writing, as I mentioned, you can work on sorting, you can making patterns, you can work on shapes, you can any hands-on exploration and play. And once a child's able to make shapes, say with the wooden pieces and have lots of fun practice with it, and you feel like they can do it from memory. So, one of my videos is make a square and I just give them 4 popsicle sticks. If they can form a square with 4 popsicle sticks all on their own, it might be a good time to say, hey, let's pull out our crayon, see if we can copy it. Or you can provide the 4 dots, as I put in the video. You can make dots for the corners and just have them connect the dots. So that's another way to scaffold. And they're also working on that visual memory, visual perceptual, and then moving on to that visual motor. So I mentioned this earlier in part 1, informal versus formal handwriting. If you want to think of formal handwriting, it's a simple way to look at it is once that writing tool, crayon, pencil is in their hand and it's hitting paper. That's when, we're getting more into that independent work. We're copying, we're writing things from our memory. And it's going to be more difficult. Depending on the child, it depends, developmentally where they are. It can be too hard. So we want to make sure we spend lots of time at the preschool and pre-K level working on all these skills so we can build up on their fine motor. They can learn the ideas of starting and stopping, having control, imitation, the language piece, and understanding, and the visual perceptual skills. I want to add that to that. That needs to be right there because the visual perceptual skills, the visual memory, and that ability to interact with the letter and use wooden pieces in order to form the letters and break it down. So if I'm going to make a P, I need a big line and a little curve. And I know there's 2 steps. I know where it starts because that's where Smiley is. And we're able to go through and follow through with all the steps needed. So as I mentioned, Matman is a great way to practice and interact and play with being with the little lines and little curves and understanding the pieces. You can form them with the wooden pieces in the interactive set, and then you can copy it using crayons and anything else you'd like to work that's appropriate with kids. So Matman, again, teaches sequencing. That's what we're going to need, sequencing to write letters, right? We have to know, first I do this, then I do this. So say if we're going to make an R, I know there's 3 steps and there's 3 different pieces, and we have to do them in sequential order to create it. Same thing what happens when we draw Matman. We're going to do it in sections. When I teach Matman, as I mentioned, I love to start at the top because we want our letters to start at the top, and it builds on strategies. You can work on chunking for information. You can have the children draw their face, which again, they will just only have to work with big curves and little curves, which are the easiest thing to write for younger kids. Then you can move on to using straight lines. So once the head is mastered, you build down. And again, you're working on body awareness. You're working on top, middle, and bottom. Again, they're going to need that for their letters. So once we learn all those skills and have them internally and perceptually, we can use them to build the letters, because once we put letters in there, there's going to be another demand of learning. So it's good to have all these underlying skills before we get started to set up the child for success. Part 1 also covered this. Again, it's just a quick review. We want to remember not all letters are built the same. And ironically, A is just about the hardest letter to write. And that's usually where we start. So we want to start with these nice straight lines. This is going to be about your easiest. An O, nice and easy, right? That's about at the 3-year mark. So when you get to a square using vertical and horizontal lines, that's when you're getting it at the 4.5-year-old level. So like a lot of our square letter, I say write a little elf. So E, L, and F are like the easiest. So nice, quick, short strokes, and get some practice under their belt, get their confidence. I can write letters. And if you move on and it gets hard, circle back. Have days that we're going to do E, L, and F, and we'll get really good at it, and go slow and steady wins the race. So as I mentioned too, try to be careful with lowercase letters. Don't try to, this just me, part of the Handwriting Without Tears program and my experience. Lowercase letters in preschool are very, very difficult. And my advice is to get lots of practice with these uppercase letters and get a nice, strong foundation again. You're going to build your foundation using your multisensory tools when you first introduce the program. And then you're going to circle back around. It's going to spiral back to being able to write the letters in uppercase letters and your numbers. We always kind of forget about the numbers. That's more good practice there. And you can use the numbers, the wooden pieces again, and all those multisensory pieces can be used with numbers. And then once they master it, most kids in pre-K may be able to get some exposure to lowercase letters. Of course, they can look at the lowercase letter, expose them to the lowercase letter when they see it. But in my advice, please do not try to have kids start with lowercase letters, because what they're going to do is they're going to compensate and they're going to draw their letters, and bad habits are going to form, and you're going to have incorrect motor patterns on your lowercase letters are extremely hard to break. And a lot of times what happens is they get errors. Children deform errors in writing their name because it's usually the first word they learn to write. They're saying, here's what your name looks like. And they're shown in title case with, a capital first letter and then the rest is lower. And they draw it. And they may copy that for a year. And they're drawing it with incorrect patterns because they haven't learned how to do the motor patterns. And once those letters are there, they're stuck and they're very hard to break. And a lot of times they're high frequency letters. And even a handful of say 5 letters that are formed incorrectly, such as A and T and whatever, they start from the bottom and it's kind of messy. That's going to haunt them for a long time, if not forever. So then that's my red warning flag there. Be careful when your kids are forming letters incorrectly, especially the lowercase. And I can do a quick side note. In general, long term, when kids write longer sentences and paragraphs, about 2% of our writing is uppercase. So if they do make errors, just on a side note, as they're learning how to interact and write with letters in form and sequence and eventually write on a line, that's kind of like a practice section, right? And then once they get in, they get all that practice in and they get into kindergarten and they really start breaking into those lowercase letters. Hopefully that there's enough foundation and practice there and fine motor skills so they are able to master the lowercase letters and they will have longer term good written expression with good automaticity and clear writing that people can read long term for the rest of their lives. So the grouping of the letters are frog jump capitals. You can see they're down here. The basic rule is we're going to start at the upper corner and then we go down and frog jump back to the top. So if again, you watch my videos, I do a lot of verbal exposure and breaking that down. The other set of letters is here. It's corner starting. So they're always going to start up in that left-hand corner. And then they're going to have an irregular pattern. And finally, center starting starts at the center. And all these letters are matched up here. They're not in the corner and they start in the center. And then the grading of tasks, I think I've gone over this too. As mentioned in my videos, I always start up with this mat. We're just matching on this mat. No visual perceptual, no visual memory needed. And it gets a little bit harder. You're going to have to access some of your visual memory and matching. And again, roll-a-dough, Stampin' See, you're going to get more of that scaffolding. The Stampin' See, you're going to have an introduction to using a writing tool. You don't necessarily have to use it. And then we have wet, dry, try. Again, that visual perceptual is kind of always there and we're building on it while we're developing our fine motor skills. So the mat to the wooden piece, of course, is there. It's going to give our perception of our left side. Tap big lines is another multisensory tool. Wet, dry, try. And the stages of mastery, just a quick review. Easy, right? It's going to get a little bit harder. And once we get here, hopefully this is kindergarten. This is pre-K. We're getting just some exposure to the book. Preschool, all that good multisensory interaction. We want to work on our kids' confidence. We want them to feel good. When I see pencil and paper, it's not a scary thing because I spent so much time in here developing all those really good skills. I hope this helps. Please hit like and subscribe. Check out my other videos. Hopefully this will all make sense. Please leave likes and comments. Give me some ideas. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to help you. Thanks again. Bye.